Order! Order! You are an incorrigible delinquent at times. Behave yourself, man!
Now, the Prime Minister has not had the warmest of receptions to his EU deal. We showed you the negative newspaper front pages last night. Today, the reaction moved to the Commons. Our political editor, David Grossman, has been there.
Who is on top, the institutions of Europe or the Parliament of the United Kingdom? For some MPs, it's that question which encapsulates the debate on the EU. Under the statue of Parliament's architect, Sir Charles Barry, one pro-EU Conservative MP told me that the Prime Minister hadn't come back with anything like enough.
I'm naturally somebody who's very pro-European, was wanting to be convinced. The question I ask myself is if this is the very best that EU leaders can offer us at a point when there's a very serious risk that Britain might exit, what does that mean if we then tie ourselves in the long-term future?
Today was the first opportunity the Commons got to question the Prime Minister about the proposed deal. And the issue of UK parliamentary sovereignty was raised by Boris Johnson. He wanted to know how the deal would change EU treaties.
So as to assert the sovereignty of this House of Commons and of these Houses of Parliament.
The Prime Minister's answer suggested that something along those lines might be added to the deal.
I'm keen to do even more to put beyond doubt that this House of Commons is sovereign, and that is something we will look to do at the same time as concluding these negotiations.
This afternoon, Mr Cameron was asked about this by the BBC's political editor.
If there's more we can do to make clear parliamentary sovereignty and indeed to reform our situation in terms of human rights acts, then I will be very keen to do that.
But do you deny that ministers are working on such a proposal that you expect to publish alongside the final deal?
Answer the question very
You haven't
clearly.
quite.
Well, that's the answer you're getting.
Tomorrow, backbenchers have managed to get a Commons debate on this very subject. Many are particularly critical of the so-called red card proposal, where if 15 parliaments across the EU band together, they may be able to block an EU initiative.
Well, at the moment, there isn't enough there on the table, and most people can see that. The red card system, pooling together other parliaments to try to stop unwanted legislation in this country, is simply not going to work. I think the Prime Minister realises that and perhaps has left himself open a chink of light so that he can pull something out the bag depending on the opposition and the strength of the opposition to his proposals later in the debate.
So what would you like to get from him, given that he has to get it past 27 other heads of government?
Fundamental change, which is what he promised in his Bloomberg speech. And for many of us, that means the ability for this Parliament and other parliaments as well, with regards to their own respect, to say no, to stop any unwanted EU taxes or directives.
For Sarah Wollaston, at least, a guarantee that the UK Parliament is sovereign over EU law would be very welcome.
I think it would help a great deal, because if at the moment this emergency brake we're reliant on 14 other members approximately agreeing to it, well, realistically, is that going to happen?
But for Ken Clarke, it's impossible to have such a guarantee and still belong to the EU.
Eurosceptics are very keen on pressing things they know that are impossible to get. You couldn't belong to NATO if you said that British Parliament could unilaterally override our NATO obligations any time, and if we don't want to join in, we won't. You couldn't join the United Nations if you said, oh, the British Parliament's sovereign, it must be free to alter the Charter and reject the terms of the Charter. I could go on, the World Trade Organization, the IMF. The idea you turn up saying, of course, the government signed up to all this, but back home I have the British Parliament, which can reject any of the treaty obligations that governments have entered into when it wants.
It is, though, difficult to imagine what form of words could both satisfy Conservative MPs sceptical of the EU project and the EU leaders who think the answer to Europe's problems is more integration.
Well, before we talk about some of those issues, worth having a look at the newspapers, which are interesting headlines, actually. A Daily Mail, big headline. Who will speak for England? They actually do explain, by England they mean the whole of the United Kingdom. They're quoting, in fact, I think Arthur Greenwood in 1939. They liken, OK, I'll hold it to camera, likening the decisions we're making at this point, likening those decisions to ones taken in 1939 when we went to war. The Times lead on cancer, in fact, but there's a little piece here about Michael Gove, torn between Cameron and Brexit. And The Guardian, interesting one, PM's hard line, the one you've heard about there in David's piece. PM's hard line woos Johnson, suggesting that Boris Johnson is actually going to join the In campaign. Well, let's focus on the Leave campaign now, because a lot has been going on. As it happens, at the same time, there have been mumblings about why there are two Leave campaigns, often fighting each other. And there's also been dissent within one of those two, Vote Leave. And tonight, Lord Lawson has been parachuted in as a new chairman. Some have called it disarray. Others say it's all now been sorted out. Steve Baker is a Conservative MP and a member of Vote Leave. He's also chair of the Westminster Group Conservatives for Britain. Very good evening to you. So much to talk about. Let's start with the sovereignty question, which was in David Grossman's piece. Do you see, as a sceptic, do you see a way in which the Prime Minister can assert the sovereignty of the British Parliament above the treaties of the EU without us leaving?
Yes. Oh, without us leaving? No, it's very simple. What you do is you repeal the European Communities Act. But there's two ideas floating around. One is a constitutional court. That seems to me very dangerous without a written codified constitution. And the other idea is positively dangerous, the idea of passing an act of Parliament to say we're sovereign, because that would bring the sovereignty of Parliament within the jurisdiction of the courts, creating at the very best a paradox, and at worst something positively dangerous.
Didn't Philip Hammond say something about this?
He did. On the day that I launched Conservatives for Britain, 7th of June last year, he appeared on the Mars show and he said positively, along the lines of, that giving us a veto over EU law is tantamount to exit. So,
which is the same as your view, and in fact the same as Ken Clark's view.
Yes.
You agree with Ken Clark saying
well, of course we're Conservatives. It's nice to agree sometimes, right. But yes, I mean yes. If you,
you can't have it both ways.
You can't have it both ways.
Okay, no, that's very clear. Your position on that. Boris Johnson, this headline in The Guardian, there's a report, it's not just The Guardian, they're saying he's tilting towards the In campaign. That is quite a blow, isn't it, for you?
No, it's not. At this stage, I've said that I'm happy to go into the campaign with the team we've got. I'm proud of the team we've got. What did Shakespeare write? We few, we happy few, fewer men, the greater share of honour, all those things. You know, we've got to look at the bright side. But the reality is Conservatives can't believe everything they read in The Guardian. And
You're still hopeful that maybe he will come your way?
I'd be very grateful for every Conservative MP, every parliamentarian, every voter of whatever political party who joins the campaign to leave. It is cross-party. I'd be grateful. Of course, I would like...
You'd like Boris?
Of course, we'd like all of the members of the cabinet.
Is Lord Lawson going to actually be the leader of the campaign? Because he was big in the 80s, wasn't he?
I'd like honestly, I'd like the Prime Minister to lead us out of the EU. You know, that would be my dream ticket. It's not going to happen. That Lord Lawson's role in coming into Vote Leave as chairman is to be the political colossus that he is.
He lives in France.
He does, and so that's a good thing for a Eurosceptic. He loves France.
Does he believe if we leave that he will be able to live in France? He's not working there. Well, I don't think he's getting benefits, but he's not working.
Under the Vienna Convention rights, he would be entitled to continue to live in France under rights that he's acquired under these treaties. But the point is that he is a political colossus, and it's evident to anyone that we have work to do, both to reach out to the other campaigns who wish to leave the European Union in order to collaborate, and also to make sure that parliamentarians feel much more closely engaged of whatever political party in the campaign. And that's what Lord Lawson's task is over the next few weeks.
You said the Vote Leave campaign needed material changes. You were one of the complainers. You didn't really think...
And I don't know that I was a complainer. I think I've been wearing the UN blue helmet, as Conservative Home put it.
There have been some changes tonight. Dominic Cummings and Matthew Elliott have stepped down from the board.
Yes, which was always planned. They've created space.
That was always planned, was it?
Yes, absolutely. The plan was.
So why were you complaining? Why was there an attempted putsch last week?
Well, I wasn't complaining. I think that the issue of why is one for people's memoirs now. It's an issue for the board and the individuals involved, and I'm sure it will be remembered very differently in different people's memoirs. But Dominic and I have not always agreed. But I've learned to love Dominic Cummings. He's a brilliant man. He will win this campaign and take us out of the EU.
It's all sorted, basically.
It is.
And there's no material change, because he's still running the campaign. It's just not on the board.
The material change is that Lord Lawson and Lord Forsyth are joining us to bring additional political capital, which will be used, and it's up to Lord Lawson and the board to decide how to do it, which will be used to improve our relations with Leave.EU and the other campaigns.
Right. Stop there. You're going to merge with Leave.EU now, aren't you? Dominic Cummings was one of the impediments to that, and now he's gone. Leave.EU are saying, we wanted to join and we're going to join.
Well, as politicians so often say, there are no plans for a merger. What we have to do is get to the point that there is a single designated campaign. Vote Leave will apply for designation. I am supporting Vote Leave. I believe Vote Leave will win that designation. I believe Vote Leave will win the referendum. What we need to do is make sure that every single person of decency and goodwill who wishes to participate in the referendum has their place. And that is the negotiation which must take place, that's the accommodation which must be reached.
Right. And in a word, would you actually like there to be a merger?
I don't think it's possible, no. And the reason is there are genuine disagreements about strategy and tactics.
Pity we don't have time to go into those. Steve Baker, thanks.
You're welcome.
Thanks very much indeed.
I've been